Thank you for tuning in to Andronetalks Radio, gathering as one in our sovereign truth from a galactic perspective, exploring our world with new ideas, knowledge, and a promise of a better future. Galactic discussions for galactic-minded people. Andronetalks.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on Andronetalks News. This is your alternative news, current events, and disclosure. So I'm bringing you over to our current website, and just a reminder that we do update our articles every single day, or at least every single day. And there's also a whole bunch of articles that have been archived, from here's the whole month of February, January, and so forth. And you'll see that there's a bunch of articles here. I'm going to step back a bit and bring you over to the editor's update. This is an article that was written by SuperSleuth today that I really felt I wanted to share with you all. And here is the article. So, of course, if you want to take a look at this yourself, you can do that and just get right on the site. And so I'm going to read this article through, and I know it's a little bit long, but I thought it was very important. It covers a lot of history as well as an understanding of what's going on over in Eastern Europe and the world, Russia versus Ukraine. And then there's NATO. February 28, 2022. The past few weeks have been littered with projections of sanctions and a pending global war with Russia that really deserves a closer look. The media is split. One side is convinced that Russia is a big bad bear, ready to jump at the chance of devouring Ukraine, and the others just doesn't understand what is happening. Now that a war has been declared, the world must have the courage to look past the sheer magnitude of information being propelled at us and decide individually what the actual truth is and what we should do about it collectively. A bit of history of events that led up to this moment are worth remembering or discovering for those that are not familiar with this region's complicated relationship. Ukraine is the second largest country by an area after Russia in Eastern Europe. It has a complicated history, mostly due to its territory being contested, divided, and ruled by a variety of powers, including the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Tsardom of Russia. In the 15th century, it was the key center of East Slavic cultures and was known as Kievan Rus, hence the capital's name of Kiev. In the aftermath of the Russian Revolution, a national movement for self-determination emerged, and the internationally recognized Ukrainian People's National Republic, UPR-UNR, was declared in 1917. In 1922, it became the founding member of the USSR and regained its independence in 1991, following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, which Ukraine, by the way, was one of the 3 USSR republics that declared its non-existence. Ukraine suffered as an independent nation, as it had to constantly fight the variety of powers that wanted to rule them in the past. It subsequently suffered under Soviet rule, which Joseph Stalin orchestrated a famine that resulted in the starvation and deaths of millions of Ukrainians, better known as Holodomor. This resulted in massive cracks in the stability of Ukraine, which would have a lasting impact on its future well-being. One of these fault lines began to emerge when the eastern part of Ukraine became under Russian rule much earlier than the western part did. The people in the east have a much stronger historical ties with Russia and their leaders than the West does. They have also been more supported by Russia than the East has, thanks to this earlier integration. The Western region spent centuries under the unstable and shifting control of European powers. Ukraine has never been a well-functioning state, but one has been corrupted by various illegal practices. These corrupt practices have constituted the rules by which the state has been run. Its political state is best described as a state capture. Most Ukrainians have never known a democratically just system. They just accept that their daily lives naturally include bribery and that the political elite just rotate within the system. There have been many attempts to rectify this. However, there is still a poor widespread understanding of what constitutes corruption in an everyday level. Many ordinary Ukrainians believe that their leaders have managed to stay a part of the wealthy global elite, while the country's average standard of living has fallen, and this is just a fact of life. Business and politics have often been fused in Ukraine, and the rule of law has been weakened over time. Almost all transactions, from visiting a doctor to managing a business to running a political office, have all incurred informal taxes or rent. Political offices are held on a basis of dependence on powerful masters, and the average populace has no chance of breaking through this system to speak on behalf of the people and express their real concerns. Many Ukrainians have had to accept that everyday bribery is just a way of getting anything done. Putin is well aware of all this. He has been warning Western countries of the deadly implications of allowing countries like Ukraine and Georgia into an organization like NATO, without considering the parts of these countries that remain defiant and suspicious of their country's corrupt political system. Ukraine has shown its willingness to become a solid and trustworthy member of the international community, but it has always had an odd toe-in-the-water approach to its overall commitments. It declared itself as a neutral state and formed a military partnership with Russia and other Commonwealth of Independent State CIS countries, but it has never been a member of the CIS, even though it was one of its founding members. That's an odd move when the primary objective of the CIS was to recognize all founding members as independent from the Soviet Union, Belarus, and Russia, or the other two member states. Ukraine established a partnership with NATO in 1994, which Russia vehemently opposed. Some argue that Russia has always considered the Ukraine as a natural part of Russia because of their religious heritage. In 988 AD, Vladimir I, also known as the pagan prince of Novgorod, Russia, and the Grand Prince of Kiev, accepted the Orthodox Christian faith and was baptized in the Crimean city of Chersonesus. Vladimir Putin has referred to the Ukrainian people and the Russians as one people and a single whole because of this. The relationship between the US and Russia regarding NATO is fraught with potential misunderstandings, with far-reaching implications. It is unclear as to what the true intentions have been from the US regarding its relationship with Russia and other Eastern Bloc countries. In 1990, then US Secretary of State James Baker verbally assured Mikhail Gorbachev that there would be no extension of NATO's jurisdiction of forces of NATO 1 inch to the east. Many would argue today that this statement was misconstrued and that Baker was only referring to an expansion past Germany after its reunification. Russia did not understand it to be the case and saw the promise of non-expansion to include all Eastern Bloc countries. In 1991, when the Soviet Union dissolved, Russia became increasingly concerned over its border security as more and more Eastern European countries began to join NATO. NATO was forged in 1949 in the aftermath of World War II as a system of collective security whereby its independent member states agree to mutual defense in response to an attack by any external party. NATO's motto is, "An attack on one is an attack on all." Ukraine and Georgia have a well-established system of corruption within their respective countries, which Russia has been warning the world about for years. Vladimir Putin has never been known to openly share his extensive knowledge on these matters, probably due to the natural aversion to the oversharing with the West and his deep nationalistic roots ingrained in him from his profound KGB ties. He is just trying to keep his backyard clean, and when anyone tries to access his turf, he bites first and explains why later, if ever. Russia's war with Georgia in 2008 has far too many similar components to the aggression seen today between Russia and Ukraine for the world to ignore. Both countries have breakaway pro-Russian regions, respectively. In Georgia, they are the Abkhazians and the South Ossetians regions, and the Ukraine are the eastern part of Ukraine, or the Luhansk and Donetsk regions. Some believe that Russians promoted pro-Russian sentiments in these regions in order to secure their borders and gain easy access to these countries in case of future conflict. Georgia had a civil war of its own in the early 1990s, which forced them into joining the Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS, in order to maintain peace in the region. In this case, the conflict that led up to the present-day Russian tensions have initiated by Georgia's internal issues within the pro-Russian region of South Ossetia. Russia was a support mechanism for the region, and the focus became a Russian versus Georgia headline. After massive conflict between Georgia and the Russian-backed regions, Russia officially recognized the independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia from Georgia. Georgia immediately severed diplomatic relations with Russia. Sound familiar? The war between Georgia and Russia was a blip in history. Most do not remember why it started and how it ended. Those who followed it either condemned Russia for invading Georgia or they blamed the Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili for provoking Putin. There was no lead up to this latest war. 6 months ago, no one even was talking about this. Biden first began to speak about this a little over a week ago, and he told the world that he knew about this as early as November 2021. It is well known that Russia has military camps set up all around its Ukrainian border due to obvious reasons mentioned above concerning NATO member states. The U.S. follows all military activity worldwide on a daily basis, and before this pending crisis hit the news, reports of Russian military forces moving back and forth between camps were actively being reported. After Biden clearly said that he was convinced that Russia was going to invade, the position of those reports conveniently shifted into a headline that read, "More movement on the Ukrainian front from aggressive Russian troops." When just days earlier, reports questioning whether Russia was escalating or de-escalating from that region were being published. Once the U.S. got involved and began to assert its opinion, Russia began to react. Much like Ukraine today, Georgia's primary aim in the 1990s was to become a member state of NATO. NATO seems to be the thorn in Russia's neck, and it is becoming increasingly apparent that NATO must answer more questions about its expanding worldwide reach. NATO has become the world's police, and most of the populations of their member states are completely unaware of these underlying global implications. How can independent and sovereign countries justify the culmination of a military force to impose itself on non-member countries? The popular and outright propagandist term global democracy employed by most media outlets, is an outdated oxymoron at best. The current President Zelensky also deserves a closer look at this point. Volodymyr Zelensky was one of the Ukraine's most popular TV comedians less than 4 years ago. His most popular featured, well, I think I'll skip that section. You guys can read that on your own for obvious reasons. His campaign was financed by one of Ukraine's richest and most corrupt oligarchs, Igor Kolomoisky. He has always positioned himself as a populist, anti-establishment, anti-corruption figure. He and his prime minister, Volodymyr Groysman, are the first Jewish politicians to have been elected to their position in Ukraine's history. Even though Zelensky ran on a populist platform, swearing off any oligarch influence, he swiftly appointed a presidential administration of Ukraine. Andrei Boydin, a lawyer for the same oligarch that funded his campaign. He also appointed a childhood friend as deputy head of Ukraine's Secret Service. One of the first acts as president was to restore the Ukrainian citizenship to Mikhail Saakashvili, the same man who went to war with Russia while he was the president of Georgia. Saakashvili, it was dual citizenship. Zelensky also appointed Leonid Kuchma as the representative of Ukraine in the tripartite contract group for settlement in the Donbas conflict. This was a conflict that took place after the annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014. Kuchma happens to be the second president of independent Ukraine from 1994 to 2005. He was widely known as the president that had any opposition papers written about him destroyed, and several journalists died in mysterious circumstances during his presidency. He employed electoral fraud freely and was known for his corrupt relationship with the global elite. He has consistently urged NATO to speed up Ukraine's request for membership. NATO has not accepted Ukraine as a member due to the widespread political corruption, fraudulent international business dealings, and a lack of effective military capabilities. Ukraine is presently incapable of meeting NATO's alliance criteria to secure membership with them. The Pandora Papers, published in October 2021, revealed that Zelensky, his chief aide, and the head of security services have operated a network of offshore companies in the British Virgin Islands, Cyprus, and Belize. Around the time of his 2019 election, Zelensky handed over his shares in a key offshore company but Zelensky appeared to have arranged for his family to continue receiving this money from these companies. Any way you look at this, President Zelensky has been a slippery figure in Ukraine's political story, and Vladimir Putin has been closely following his political evolution. Zelensky has also made several allegations about Putin behaving like an Nazi dictator, when East Ukraine has well-known deep connections to this group from the past. Ukraine's far-right Nazi tendencies, Western Ukraine, have been obvious for decades, but this is hardly mentioned today since Zelensky and his prime ministers are both of Jewish descent. Although Zelensky has been found to have deep ties to the Azov group. The far-right Western Ukraine neo-Nazi group is known as the Azov Battalion or the Azov Special Operations Detachment. This group formed as a volunteer militia in response to the Ukrainian crisis in Crimea in 2014. It was incorporated into the National Guard of the Ukraine, and all members are now contract soldiers that serve in the military group. Azov gained notoriety in 2014 when reports of torture and war crimes emerged. The use of the neo symbols such as the wolf's angel, which was one of the original symbols used by the Germans, army became evident. Azov denies that these symbols is connected to the movement, but rather that is an abbreviation for their slogan of a new national Ukraine. An Azov spokesman admitted that 10 to 20% of the group were in fact neo-Nazis. In 2015, the U.S. Congress overturned a bill that had blocked all military aid to Azov. In 2018, the U.S. Congress passed a bill that blocked all military aid to Azov on the grounds of its white supremacist ideology. Azov battalion members have received training near Kiev by instructors with experience in the Georgian armed forces. It has and is receiving funding, military equipment from the Ukrainian oligarchs, and more recently from the U.S. government. They've also received military training from the United States in 2014, but in June 2015, the U.S. government revoked any further aid to them. It then reinstated the aid in November 2015. Today, the Azov group has formed a new political party known as the National Corps. It advocates expanding the powers of the country's president, restoring Ukraine's nuclear power status, nationalizing enterprises that were government-owned when it became independent in 1991, to break all ties with Russia, and is against joining the European Union as well as NATO. It wants to create the Intermarium Union, which would include Baltic and Black Sea nations. It also wants to expand the right to bear arms for all citizens and restore capital punishment for treason and for embezzlement of government funds by officials in excessive amounts. In 2017, a paramilitary group called the National Militia was formed. It is closely linked to the original Neo-Azov battalion group. Its aim is to assist law enforcement agencies and conduct street patrols. The Azov group is currently expanding its movement abroad, notably to the United States. There is a present-day assumption that Vladimir Putin is keenly aware of this and is trying to cut off the head at Russia's western borders. There is no question that Vladimir Putin has made some questionable decisions in the past. He flourished politically by climbing the arduous Soviet rank from the lowly KGB officer, after all, and he has never shied away from voicing his ultimate wish to reconstruct the Soviet Union. However, this latest episode in the Russian-Ukrainian debacle could make one wonder what the point is, other than the Western nations, aka Biden and his band of misfits, using factual historical evidence to propagate its self-indulgent political conflict. Biden's polls are horrendous. His is an incompetent sham, and the United States people are starting to question the true motivations of increasingly dictatorial federal government. This does not bode well for them, so why not fabricate tensions with the tried and true historical foe and come out of this crisis a hero for democracy? Robert Ludlum and Tom Clancy would be proud. The world has just come out of the brutal 2-year period filled with imposed lockdowns, mandates, and attempted forced, economies have been crippled, innocent people have died, human contact has been controlled and eviscerated in some countries, and spending powers are teetering. Divisive rhetoric abounds. The elderly have been sequestered, left to die alone. And it goes on and on as the world now focuses on the tensions in Ukraine. Our focus has been shifted once again. The human species is being bombarded by political tug-of-wars that frankly make no sense for us to participate in an attempt to understand. The media is complicit in creating a thick fog around the issues surrounding Eastern Europe and its latest disaster. One must be extremely open and courageous to scan all the information that is being propelled at us every day and not buckle under its pressure. But it's important for us to all read as much as possible, even though, even from sources that are distasteful to us, in order to claim our own individual assessment of this crisis. Media outlets feed on creating excessive drama that elicit extremely damaging emotional reactions through the globe. We are vulnerable right now, and our nervous systems need a break. We all should get out into nature, turn off the barrage of news and social media platforms, television, radio, and computers. Connect with our loved ones and make new friends. Let's get back to our natural human selves that embody what we truly represent. We are social creatures, and we have been locked up for 2 years. It's time to get our lives back and not let anyone tell us that we cannot do that anymore, certainly not in the name of safety, freedom, or justice. We are sovereign beings. We should never bow down to anyone, any organization, or any system that does not have our highest potential in mind. We can keep ourselves informed, but not to the point of excessively tarnishing our natural sense of existing and enjoying life as it was meant to be, outside, together, and free. This has been an article written by SuperSleuth. You are listening to Andronetalks News, and don't forget to take a look at the site. Quite a few articles on here. We did this all for you. Take advantage of it and become more wise and more knowledgeable. And everyone, thank you for listening. Take care. Have a good day.
You have been listening to Andronetalks Radio. Join us on YouTube channel Jessica Arael Morocco and visit her website at www.readingsbyarael.com.